Welcome to the Clarity Advisor Show, where you'll learn how to grow your team today. Join Ken Trupke and his guests as they discuss what works and doesn't work to grow your team in today's world. And now, your host, Ken Trupke.
Hello again, and welcome to the Clarity Advisor Show. It's been said that to be a leader, the first person you need to lead is yourself. And often there's a lot we need to work through before we can be that successful leader. My guest today, Michelle Steffes, is a coach and trainer focusing on transforming performance. Through her company, IPV, she helps leaders learn self-mastery, where leadership begins. Please welcome Michelle Steffes.
Thank you, Ken. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So tell us what IPV stands for and the kind of work that you're doing.
Awesome. I'm glad you asked. IPV stands for integrity, people, and vision, the three most important components in any successful endeavor, whether we're talking about leadership or a company or even yourself. So that's what it stands for. What I do is I help leaders to become the best version of themselves, because we can't lead unless other people can trust us, and they won't trust us unless we know how to lead ourselves. So as Ken had started out saying from the very beginning, and he hit the nail on the head, we need to learn self-mastery to begin with. So I do a lot of that through corporate training, speaking, and also coaching.
Okay, so talk a little bit about self-mastery. What does that mean to you, and how should we think about that and apply that to our lives and our leadership?
Well, actually, it's emotional intelligence, if you want to define it in, say, a book or a common slogan that people can identify with. And emotional intelligence sprung up about a decade or so ago, really became a hot thing. And it actually changed the engagement numbers as I was following them over the past decade in terms of these statistics. And emotional intelligence really is learning how to be intelligent about your emotions. That's really what it is. There's nothing worse than trying to follow a leader who's flying off the handle. You got to walk around them with, eggshells. You constantly can't really rely on how they're going to respond to anything. And you certainly don't feel like you can trust or rely on them. So when leaders learn how to groom that emotional intelligence side of them, and they become the best version of them, managing everything from challenges to, team needs, then you become a stable force, and that's transferred into the team. And now they begin to adopt some of the same practices. So what I do in short form is I help them to develop the necessary habits to become those types of leaders, because we can't determine our destiny, but we can determine our habits, which determine our destiny.
Okay, interesting. So I'm curious, how did you get to this point? Tell us a little bit about where you came from, your history, and how you got into this space where you're coaching people on self-mastery and leadership and mastering yourself.
Well, I started actually leading about 30 years ago. I know it sounds like a long time ago, but I was in my early 20s when I began, and I made a lot of mistakes. Having to learn the hard way sometimes is the best way to learn, but realizing that, being a leader is more about, helping people, drawing out the best of them, and creating the team vision that everyone can latch onto and move forward, and then inspiring them to adopt that vision in all their practices. So over the years, I not only did a lot of studies in leadership, but learned along the way from other leaders, as well as, nurturing myself in self-mastery. But it was about 10 years ago that I took a 30,000-foot view of everything that I had done in my past career, which really launched 5 businesses from the ground up. And I said, what do I like doing the most? And that's leading people and teams and helping them to succeed while they help their teams succeed. And so was born IPV Consulting.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, it's such an interesting space. And you and I have known each other for a few years now. And I've loved the work that I've seen you do and with some of the people that I've known that you've worked with, and just the transformation that you can get. What do you see as, I know every situation's different and it depends, right? But in general, what do you see that's consistently holding leaders back?
I think really the number one reason, and it's a very good question, thank you for your kind words, I appreciate that, is fear. And really that sounds so simple, but it's the fear of taking risks. It's the fear of stepping on somebody's toes. It's the fear of not measuring up, or of doubting ourselves as leaders all the time and questioning and second guessing ourselves. And I like to call it cognitive dissonance, which really cognitive dissonance holds back a lot of leaders. And that's when you may have the head knowledge to do what's right as the leader, but in your heart, you're constantly unsure of yourself. And that uncertainty then bleeds into your ability to lead and inspire your team. So we've got to get the fear factor out by solidifying who they are as a leader. I help them write a vision statement, and then we begin working on a set of goals that causes a complete transformation from the inside out. And that is when the results begin to happen.
So take us a little deeper on that. I'm curious. So I've got fear. I think we all can relate to that. And I'm afraid of making mistakes, afraid of conversations, whatever it is. And so how does that those goals and that, the process that you're taking us through, how do I get from goals to not being afraid anymore? What does that look like at a little bit deeper level?
Well, I like to call that self-directed neuroplasticity. So if you'll allow me for a moment.
I was totally going to call it that. So it makes
Awesome.
perfect sense. Sorry. No,
that's great. We're on the same page.
Yeah.
So self-directed neuroplasticity, first you have to understand what neuroplasticity is. And we're all neuroplastic. We are from even before we're born to all the way to the time of death. And we're more neuroplastic when we're young than we are when we're old. But we have the ability to reinvent our brain or rewire our brain. I like to call it reframe and rewire. In fact, that's the name of my book and my podcast. But basically, you were born with 100 billion neurons. I'm going to give you the short version of this. And you are constantly wiring new neural pathways and new neural networks at 400 billion actions per second of electric energy. So it's constantly firing off and wiring. You have networks that have been built in from all of your exposure to education, peers, dealing with conflict situations, dealing with trauma, leading and maybe the leading style that you've learned from your leaders. And we build all of this into us, which is what makes us us. It becomes part of our subconscious and our psyche. It's how we function. So the self-directed neuroplasticity comes in is when we begin to look at things from a different perception and feed our minds and our hearts different information that helps us to align with our vision and who we want to become. And the more we do that, the more we literally rewire our brain. And as we rewire our brain, we get more of this sense of certainty about who we can be. And it begins to exhibit itself in our habits and behaviors on the outside. Okay. So really it starts with an inside work. And I often like to say education equals confidence, because whenever you are ill-confident about yourself or your leadership abilities or any specific skill set, it's typically because you haven't taken the time to really fill your heart and mind with the way that you want to do it or the right way to do it. And so you end up selling yourself short from your ability to become that person. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it does. That's so good. It's so interesting. So yeah, absolutely. I think if I'm understanding this correctly, by rewiring your programming and working on those neural connections, that you build the confidence and believe your plan, and that's what's going to take away the fear and start showing it'll start manifesting itself on the outside when you do that work on the inside. Am I tracking?
You're perfect. Spot on. Yep. That's absolutely right. And one other thing I want to mention too, Ken, is there's something called neural pruning, and that is part of the neurogenesis. Naturally, you're going to have some attrition in your brain connections from things you don't use anymore. So as you focus on what you want to become and begin to fill your heart and mind with those things, the old thoughts and patterns will literally fall off. A good example for me would be algebra. That ship sailed over 30 years ago. Okay. I couldn't do an algebra problem now if it meant to save my life. So we're going to wire in and we're going to unwire constantly throughout our lifetime. The question is, what kind of habits and patterns are you going to put in front of you that will cause you to wire in what you want and wire out what you don't want?
Got it. Oh, that's so good. All right. Well, we're going to go deeper on this and hopefully hear some stories about situations and things. We'll do that on the other side of the break. Stay with us here on the Clarity Advisor Show. We'll be right back.
Is your business where you want it to be or on track to get there? Clarity Advisors helps business leaders improve communication and get your team aligned and engaged for greater success. We specialize in helping you streamline your sales and operating systems to improve efficiency and grow your profits. Call or text Ken at 616-822-2998 to have a complimentary 12-minute call to see what some clarity could do for you.
Okay, we're back on the Clarity Advisor Show, talking today with Michelle Steffes about rewiring our brain and neuroplasticity and all kinds of fun things that I'm learning. So, Michelle, you walked us through a little bit about how this kind of works at a high level. We like to talk here about leadership and building and growing teams. Do you have maybe a story around a leader who you've worked with that you saw some of this kind of transformation, and just tell us how that went and what was interesting?
Certainly, and thank you for asking it. Now, there are actually many examples I could share, but this one's really kind of emotional in terms of the outcome on this. But the gentleman I brought in was going to be my second-hand man, and I was asked to stop the bleeding by a team of like 8 executives around the table. And I knew that I had to get this gentleman in line with not only first the vision of the company, but to grasp really the heartbeat behind transformation with the entire team. And I know that transformation is contagious, just like gossip and demoralization and turf wars and all of those are contagious. So we need to get everybody contagious about spreading the vision, about empowering and equipping one another. So when I brought him on board, for the first 3 months, he ran very strong and he seemed like the right candidate. And he was aligning with the vision. He was going out and empowering and equipping the team. And I allowed him to make mistakes, which is important as a leader, as well as getting behind him 100%. And all I asked him to do was to first make sure that he grasped the vision. Second, that he spread it to as many as possible. And third, that he would equip other people to expand that vision as well by getting behind them in the same manner that I was getting behind him. Well, towards the end of that 3 months, his probationary period was running, to the end. And he started doing some crazy things that I just didn't know quite how to take. In fact, I would have had every right to let him go for some of the mistakes he was making. They were that serious. And I didn't understand because he had done so good up to this point. So it was my way, and it always has been my way as a leader, to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, a chance. And I'll tell you, that's one area where I see a lot of leaders don't measure up. And with all the leaders I work with, and maybe we can talk more about that later, but I don't want to go down that rabbit trail right now. So I sat him down and I said, look, what's going on? You've done so well. And I began to really praise him for what he had accomplished rather than just sitting him down and, giving him the 3rd degree. And because he trusted me and I was open with him and I had shared some thoughts about how much I believed in him, he opened up to me. And what I found out is he had just gone through a very tumultuous divorce. Now, I am one that believes that you cannot separate personal from professional life. They're going to bleed into each other, no matter how hard you try to separate them. So after he shared this with me, I had a completely different look at what he was going through. He wasn't getting along with his ex, spouse. He had 2 daughters involved. His whole world was crumbling down. There was nothing but strife and upheaval in his life. And so it was affecting his leadership, and he had gone to drinking too much. So these are all things that I wouldn't have learned had I not taken the opportunity to learn about him. So anyway, I said, look, let me think about this for a day. You come back tomorrow and we'll see what we can do. So the next day he came back and I said, look, I'm going to give you one more chance on 3 conditions. Number 1, that you let me appoint you a mentor, someone that can come alongside of you and help you. Number 2, you let me be your mentor here at work and check in with your mentor. So there's some accountability. And so we can continue the process of rewiring your brain and getting you in that place that you need to become. And number 3, I need you to continue running that vision out as far as you can. Well, he was shocked that I gave him this opportunity. And so he was such gratitude, had tears in his eyes, and he ran out in the next 3 months. He did even better than the first 3 months. And I watched him evolve. His personal life began to change and transform as I continued to pour into him and believe in him and continue to get behind him 100%, even letting him continue to make mistakes, but really pouring into him what I thought he could become and teaching him how to rewire and cognitively restruct his brain. He transformed both his personal and professional life. Not only that, but he began putting some of the same processes into the team. And so the entire team caught on. And what was once divided, and actually the team was a team of 100, just to give you an idea how big it was. But by the time he got done, we got in those next 3 months, the entire team had come together and they were all fist bumping each other in the hallway, one team, one fight. it was a very exciting time. Now, here's the clincher, and then I'll end the story. What I didn't know is that he had not been getting along with his parents either. He was in his mid-30s, so he wasn't a real young man. And but they'd prayed for him for years, and they had hoped that he would somehow, have somebody that would lead him in the direction they knew he could go and he could become. So they came into my office after all this was said and done, and he had completely transformed, and they just wanted 5 minutes with me, and all they wanted to do was thank me. And tears welled up in their eyes, and they said, "We just want to thank you because we always believed in our son, but no one's ever really given him this opportunity. And I don't know what you did, but you've completely changed his life. And I know he'll never be the same again." Now, I share that with emotion because I really believe that as leaders, that is a privilege we all have, is not just to lead an organization, but to lead a human being into a better life. And I truly believe that the principles that I walk people through help them both personally and professionally. And I've seen it again and again in case after case. Interestingly, his mother passed away that very year, but she got to see her son become the man she knew he could be.
Wow, that's so powerful. That's so good. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I've certainly experienced that in my career too, where somebody's actions and behaviors just take a hard right turn, and you're like, what happened? And if you've built some trust with them, and you've got a relationship enough that you can have a conversation, you're going to find out, in my experience anyway, you're going to find out something changed in their life. They're going through a divorce. Somebody close to them died. Some significant event happened that's causing this pivot. And people don't just typically stop being a great performer and suddenly become a horrible performer, or stop making good decisions and start making really bad decisions, unless there's some outside force. And to be able to get into that space with them and recognize what happened, and then have the tools that you have to help them to transform, is so powerful. That's such a great story. And I would imagine you see that over and over with people.
I do. And I love that you use the word relationship, because it really is about building relationships. My favorite motto is, it's always about the people. It is. It's always about the people. And so often that's overlooked. But your people on your team are the ambassadors to your vision. And if you're willing to get behind them and support them in every way, that you possibly can. Obviously, you can't hold their hand all the time, but as much as you can support them personally and professionally, and be honest with them and help them to win, the more your organization is going to win. And that's what this is all about.
Oh yeah. There's so much that you've covered. I love the idea of, getting to know people and building that relationship with them. And the idea that there's integrity, that your personal life is not 100% separate from your business life, and they bleed into each other and they overlap. And you've got to recognize that personal issues are going to affect people at work, and giving them the grace to allow that to happen, but then supporting them and helping them to move forward from those places is also so powerful. You mentioned second chances, and that one of the things that you see with leaders today is not giving second chances. Go ahead and talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm a big believer in second chances. And, as long as somebody hasn't done anything that is irreversible, I think everyone deserves a second chance. And oftentimes what leaders fail to do is find out the whole story. They may hear bits and pieces. They may have had a few people appear in the office and complain. They may get some kind of a message from HR that there's some issue. But because leaders are busy, and I understand they're busy, I know there are probably some leaders out there listening right now that are thinking to themselves, Michelle, you have no idea what my schedule's like. I don't have time to get to know everyone. Well, and that's true. But this is where we can really begin to give some autonomy, empower and equip some of our support leaders to take on that role of finding out what's going on, and of getting all the answers, and of building those relationships. And if you're a one-man show, then maybe it's time to bring on somebody that can help you with it. But the whole idea behind success has to do with not only how well you know your people, but how well you're willing to give them a chance to truly shine and be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, it's so good. And as you said earlier, that it's about the people, and I promote to teams I work with that the only thing that we have as a competitive advantage are the people inside these four walls. And now that's become virtual four walls with remote work. But the people on this team are the only thing we have that's different from what anyone else can put on the table. Anyone else can buy the equipment we have. They can learn the processes that we use. They can buy the software we use. They can replicate anything. What they can't replicate is this team. And so we've got to pour into this team and grow and build this team because that's the only thing we have that we can differentiate ourselves with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the leaders that I enjoy following actually leads, he's a CEO of Barry-Wehmiller. And Barry-Wehmiller became an incredible company where their statistics in terms of engagement are up in the 90s, which is unheard of. Because right now, if you look at engagement statistics, they've gone down, especially in the last 3 years from what they were. But I've been following them for a decade. And, they started out at around 67%. They went up to about 72%. And now they've dropped back down to about 67%, which is very sad. And a lot of it is because of the mental health issues and so on and so forth. And, we could talk about that more at length because the fact is, that is going to be one of the areas that we need to see a change and a shift in terms of how leaders lead. They need to take more account into it. And our younger generations are almost requiring it of us to some degree. But anyway, back to the Barry-Wehmiller story. They've got such a solid engagement practice within that organization that they've gotten offers from all over the world, better offers, and the employees literally will not leave. And one quick example that I can use from the situation is when 2008 had happened and all the companies were laying off, the board recommended to save $30 million that they lay off a good chunk of their team. But instead, the CEO decided it was more important that all of them suffer a little rather than a few suffer a lot. So what he said was, let's instead tell everyone to take 2 weeks off during the year without pay, but you can do it in little sections or you can do it all at once, however you want. And we're going to include the executive team in on this. And so by doing that, everyone felt like they were on the same platform and they began helping each other out. So like the ones that couldn't really afford to take the time off began to give it to others, or rather take the time off instead so they wouldn't have to take the time off. They really began to pull together as a team and as one unit fighting. And when it was all over with and Barry-Wehmiller regained their profits back, they even returned the money back for all the time off that was taken. So again, going back to understanding the people and the logic behind really pouring in and showing people that you truly care about them is the result and the outcome that you can always get to the degree that you pour in.
Yeah. And now, did you know about them prior to, I think it was in Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last book that I heard about that. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
The CEO's name is escaping me right now, but he wrote a book on it. And I can look it up for you afterwards and give it to you for, putting it into your caption. But I highly recommend it.
Yeah. I first heard about that company through that Simon Sinek book, and lots of powerful examples of great culture and great ways that people start working together because of how they structured things. Yeah. Really, really good stuff. So Michelle, as you work with a lot of leaders and see a lot of different companies, what do you see that's changed? You mentioned earlier, you've been doing this for 3 decades now. So what has changed over those decades, and what's some advice that you have based on what you see leaders doing or not doing these days?
Well, I want to say that it's really gone from a fear-based leadership mentality to an inspiring mentality, at least for those who are succeeding. Okay. There are still leaders out there that think the fear-based is the way to go. But what they're finding is there's an awful lot of attrition in their teams, lots of turf war silos, profit loss, safety issues, and the list just goes on in terms of what disengagement can produce. But what the younger generation is looking for is an opportunity to be innovative. They're looking for opportunities for someone to actually get behind and believe in their talents and giftings. I mean, we think about how our onboarding systems often require, difficult tests and, jump through these hoops and have this many interviews. And we go through all the effort and spend all the money doing that. And then we put them behind a desk and give them a list of tasks, and we never use their talents and giftings. And all this does is frustrate them and cause them to move on quickly. So we don't see the long-term retention that we used to, because mindsets have changed, and the culture that we live in today requires more innovation, especially with the constant changing platforms of, AI and electronics and everything that's available today. And then when you add into that factor the 3 years ago COVID incident that we all had to go through, now we're dealing with a lot of mental health issues. So if leaders aren't willing to really pivot and take a whole nother look at how they're leading, they're going to continue to see the same downward spiral, and they're never going to get the platform that they need to really expand their company and pull out the best of their workers.
Yeah, absolutely. So for leaders that maybe recognize either in themselves, I'm still fearful, I don't feel like I'm confident, I don't have my mission clear, I don't think I'm self-mastered. If they're feeling those feelings, how do you recommend they proceed? Obviously this is what you do for a living. Are there books and things people could do, or do they need to seek out a coach like you, or what's your best advice for them to get their arms around that situation so that they can become the leader they need to be for their team?
Well, I think really, you hit the nail on the head in terms of seeking a coach. Doesn't necessarily have to be me, although I'd like that. But having that extra pair of eyes on the outside looking in, and even maybe having an assessment done, a DISC assessment or some other assessment, and really begin to take that 30,000 foot view like I took years ago and look at what they're doing that they could change, but also be honest about who they want to become, and get it in writing and begin to construct a plan of action that involves cognitive restructuring, rewiring of the brain, and willingness to stay open to learn. Now, one of the things that I need to add to this is a lot of times leaders say, okay, well, that's all fine and dandy, but again, Michelle, I don't have the time. But what all of us have time to do is to change what we're doing alongside of our lives. Now, here's what I mean by that. If everyone has a morning routine, you get up, you shave, you shower, whatever you do, put on your makeup, do your hair, pack your lunch, whatever you do, we all do it. Why not, while you're getting ready in the morning, turn on an audiobook? I recommend John Maxwell, Simon Sinek. These are some of my favorites. Craig Groeschel, the gentleman I mentioned earlier, which I still have to get you his name, but just listen to something alongside of while you're getting ready. Listen in the car. Just listening in the car 12,000 miles a year is equivalent to a 2-year college education. You can turn your car into a university on wheels, and you can begin to feed your heart and mind the right things that align with the person you want to become. And then the accountability piece comes in if you can get yourself a mentor or coach. So again, having those eyes on the outside looking in, being honest with you, helping you to assess where you need to go is very impactful.
Oh, that's so good. So let me ask the next question. If I'm a leader and I see a need on my team, do I need to get up to speed and then help to coach them? Or what does it make more sense in your experience to just help that teammate get into a program, find a coach, find a mentor, start working on these things? Do I need to be the person that brings them along, or can I send them off somewhere and help them? And presumably I'm working on myself at the same time, but if the leaders aren't quite to the point where they think they've got it and they can teach it, do we still send people off, or do we wait until we've got it first?
Great question. I love that. Well, first of all, you're right. We ourselves need to be interested and reflecting a growth mindset. If we're not doing it ourselves, if we're not trying to improve, they're not going to do it either. They just forget it. Okay. Because they're going to follow your lead. But as far as what you can do, it's going to depend on, I think, case per case. Because for every organization, we have some organizations, I'm sure, that are listening are very small. So in that case, you may need to have some specific opportunities for team training that are collaborative, where you're all working on solutions together and not just barking out what needs to happen. You may have other instances where you can have somebody get a coach, or maybe get a free consultation to see if a coach is fitting for them. And in other cases, such as Laszlo Bock, who is the Senior Vice President of People Operations for Google, and he consistently did 6-month surveys and found out all of the shortcomings of his lowest performing leaders. He would then assign them coaches and pay for the coaches. And he got back a 75% ROI on it, because it improved their team 75% of the leaders were able to come back with excellent results and begin to perform at higher levels. And we all know that improving a current leader is cheaper than replacing that leader. So depending on where you are, what you can afford, or what you can do in terms of yourself is going to vary. But I think all of those answers are right.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Michelle, this has been great. It's been a lot. I've taken a ton of notes, and I know people are going to want to go back and listen again and take even more notes. What are some, I know you're always pouring into yourself and continuing to learn. And you mentioned like John Maxwell and Simon Sinek and things that we can listen to and turn our car into, I think Zig Ziglar said it was Automobile University because of all the hours you spend. Yeah, it's all solid stuff. What are some other books maybe that you're reading currently, or podcasts that you listen to, and places that we can go to start diving into this topic?
Well, first off, I'm going to mention my podcast and book.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my podcast is Reframe and Rewire. It's right now in 113 countries, and I do it once a week. It's a 7-minute snippet, so it's easy to listen to. My book is also Reframe and Rewire, so I recommend those books. This is a guidebook to walk you through transformation in your life, both personally and professionally. And then I also have The Machine Inside Me. This is my newest release for 7 to 14 years old, if they want to take the journey out of the jungle of their minds as well. And then some other ones is the Craig Rochelle Leadership Podcast, I think is one of the best ones out there. I've turned on some other leaders to his podcast, and they absolutely love it. He has some wonderful nuggets. You've also got Minute with Maxwell, which is usually about a minute or 2 minutes. And he'll send out emails if you want to subscribe to those at no cost, but you can look up the podcast. And I know Simon Sinek has a great podcast out there as well. So really all the ones I've mentioned are the ones I would recommend first and foremost.
Yeah, that's great. And it's so funny because it's somewhat of a paradox that in this information age, the struggle isn't to find great, or I should say the struggle isn't that there's not great information out there. It's being able to winnow down all through all the noise and find the signal and find what's worth listening to, because there's just so much. But the beauty is if you can tap into that right vein, there is so much. And we can expose ourselves to so many things now so easily with audiobooks and podcasts and so forth. So yeah, well, this has been such a great conversation, Michelle. I really appreciate you making time to be with us. Who should reach out to you, and what would be the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Well, I would say anyone interested in a massive culture change in their teams. I do an incredible leadership mastery course that can last anywhere from 6 to 12 months. And that's because it has to have that building of unity between the departmental pieces of the organization, as well as some accountability pieces and constructive tools that they can use to work collaboratively on solutions. But I also do the executive coaching and so on. And I also would encourage the leader who's struggling and feeling like they just can't seem to pull it together no matter how hard they try. And they've tried many other types of maybe coaches or other programs, and it's not been good for them. So I offer a free consultation for either. And I also offer myself as a speaker, say a 1-hour keynote or a 45-minute lunch and learn, if that's something you'd be interested in.
Fantastic. Now, I'm curious, just a quick follow-up question on that. In this kind of post-pandemic world where we're all more remote, do you do this coaching remotely? And are you finding that that's been as effective as it was when it used to only be in person?
Absolutely. In fact, I've done it internationally. And it's been a joy because it's really expanded my boundaries and my ability to reach so many. And I've kept it just as collaborative as in person. The only difference is, obviously there's not the synergy when you're in person. However, I make a great effort to make sure that all the same tools and interactions and breakouts and all those types of things are included in the virtual. And in some cases, I've found the virtual to be more effective for those who are a little bit more shy and not willing to share out loud with, say, a group in person. And I've had the opportunity to bring them in on the screen more frequently. So no matter where you are, this can be very effective.
Okay. Oh, that's so good. So yeah, we'll get the books in the show notes. Obviously your books and your podcast will be in the show notes, and ways to connect with you also in there, so people can get those resources and find their way to you. So again, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I know people are going to want to go back and listen again, and make sure they get all the pieces, and as well as get your books and get up to speed. Just thank you so much for being here, Michelle. It's been really fun catching up.
Thank you, Ken. It's been a joy and an honor. Appreciate
Okay,
it.
well, you're so welcome. And that brings us to the end of another Clarity Advisor show. If this was interesting, as I know it was for you, and we would certainly appreciate if you could take a minute and rate us on the platform that you are currently watching or listening on. That's super helpful to expand the reach of this podcast and get more people tuned in. With that, it brings us to the end, and we appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time on the Clarity Advisor show.
Thank you for listening to the Clarity Advisors Show. Clarity Advisors is a speaking, training, and consulting firm specializing in helping you simplify your sales and operating systems to improve efficiency and grow your profits. Connect with Clarity Advisors today to learn more about how they can help you improve communication and get your team aligned and engaged for greater success.